Grace is visited by her estranged sister, Faith McCauley, who she hasn't spoken to in 7 years. Desperate and traumatized, Grace tells Faith everything that happened during the horrifying night, including the twisted ritual games of the Domas family and even seeing the spirit of Mr. Lubale himself. Although Faith is disturbed by how terrified Grace seems, she struggles to believe the supernatural parts of the story. Elsewhere, the dying Chester Danforth learns that the entire Domas family has been wiped out, while Grace somehow survived. Realizing the balance of power has changed, he sends a message to the remaining elite families connected to the same satanic cult council once led by the Domas bloodline. Among them are Ignacio El Cato, Wan Chin Shing, brothers Madhu and Viraj Rajan, and Bill Wilkinson. Chester also summons his twin children, Ursula and Titus, but instead of mourning the situation, they become furious after learning the cult's seat of power is now open for competition instead of automatically being handed to them. Chester reminds them that these are the sacred rules created by Lubale himself. But the twins don't care. In a shocking moment, Ursula and Titus smother their own father to death with a pillow before gathering the remaining families together to claim control for themselves. Back at the hospital, Detective Bassett prepares to take Grace into custody for further questioning, but before he can leave, Bill suddenly appears and throws a knife directly into Bassett's neck, killing him instantly. Grace and Faith immediately flee the scene, with Grace grabbing Bassett's gun from his dead body. Bill chases after Grace, desperate to kill her and seize power for himself, but the moment he attacks her, his body violently explodes into pieces of blood and flesh. The horrifying sight completely terrifies Faith. Moments later, armed members of the cult surround the sisters and knock them unconscious using gas. As Grace fades out, the cult members explain that Bill doomed himself because he broke Lubale's rules by trying to kill Grace before the deadly game officially began, and because of that mistake, his entire bloodline is now cursed to die early as punishment. The leaders of the remaining cult families gather at the luxurious Danforth Lodge and Casino to prepare for the next deadly ritual. Ignacio arrives with his children, Felipe and Francesca has a personal grudge against Grace since she was once engaged to Alex before Grace entered the picture. Chin Shing shows up with her lazy and entitled son, Ching Fu, while brothers Madhu and Viraj Rajan arrive alongside Madhu's wife, Martina. Waiting for them is a mysterious figure known only as the lawyer. He explains the horrifying truth to Grace and Faith. Because Grace survived the Domas family's deadly game of hide-and-seek, she is now eligible to inherit control over the council and the massive power that comes with it. But to claim it, she must survive another hunt until sunrise while every family tries to kill her. If nobody is wearing the council's sacred ring by dawn, Lubale himself will become enraged. Grace refuses to participate at first, but the cult quickly forces her hand by threatening to murder Faith right in front of her. The sisters are knocked unconscious once again and transported to a massive golf course in the middle of the night, where the hunt officially begins. Grace and Faith are given a short head start before the families are released after them. However, Ursula and Titus secretly cheat to give themselves an unfair advantage in the game. Viraj, Ignacio, and Chin Shing personally lead the hunt for their families while everyone else watches the chaos unfold remotely through security cameras back at the lodge. Ignacio attempts to take the sisters out with a sniper rifle from long distance, but Grace and Faith outsmart him by tricking him into firing at a propane tank. The explosion nearly kills Viraj and sends burning debris everywhere. Grace survives, but pieces of shrapnel tear into her skin, leaving her injured and bleeding. Eventually, Grace and Faith find shelter inside an industrial building, but Viraj manages to track them down. While hiding, the sisters discover a massive bandsaw and finally cut off their handcuffs. Unfortunately, the noise alerts Viraj to their location. Thinking quickly, Grace and Faith ambush him and shove him into a giant industrial washing machine. In a brutal and horrifying moment, Grace slams the sanitize button, causing the machine to heat up until Viraj is literally boiled alive from the inside. His screams echo through the building before suddenly stopping. Back at the lodge, Madhu watches the horrifying footage in complete terror, realizing he's now expected to continue the hunt in his brother's place. Too cowardly to risk his own life, Madhu desperately avoids the responsibility by giving up his role as head of the family and transferring it to his wife, Martina. Furious at his weakness and cowardice, Martina calls him out in front of everyone, but despite her disgust, she still signs the contract and officially takes his place in the deadly game. Inside the casino, Grace and Faith finally find a moment to hide and catch their breath while painfully pulling pieces of shrapnel out of Grace's skin. As the tension dies down for a brief moment, the sisters begin opening up to each other for the first time in years. Faith admits that she always felt abandoned after Grace left for New York and never looked back, forcing her to deal with everything alone. Before the emotional reunion can go any further, Qinxing suddenly finds them. Instead of attacking, she offers Grace a shocking alternative. According to a loophole discovered by her lawyers, if Grace agrees to marry Qingfu, the Wan family would inherit the council's power, and Grace would be spared. Qinxing even promises that Grace wouldn't have to live as Qingfu's actual wife. But Grace immediately rejects the offer, refusing to spend the rest of her life trapped inside a satanic cult. Moments later, Ignacio tracks the sisters down and opens fire on them. In the chaos, Grace grabs Qinxing's sword arm and accidentally drives the blade straight through Ignacio's throat. The kill instantly triggers another one of Lu Bale's cursed rules. Competing families are forbidden from killing each other under any circumstance, even by accident. Desperate for help, Grace and Faith attempt to call 911, but Ursula and Titus intercept them before they can escape. The twins order the sisters to head toward the front gates, pretending they'll let them leave, but Grace and Faith already figured out that the twins secretly rigged the game earlier. When Faith holds Qinxing's sword to Titus's throat and threatens to kill him, Ursula coldly admits she doesn't care if her own brother dies. The distraction briefly gives the sisters an advantage, but the twins quickly regain control of the situation. Suddenly, headlights appear in the distance as Martina comes speeding toward them in a car. The opening gives Grace and Faith the chance to run, even though Grace desperately tries convincing Faith to escape on her own. As they split up, Grace is suddenly ambushed by Francesca while Titus viciously attacks Faith. Grace and Francesca spray mace directly into each other's faces, temporarily blinding both of them in a painful struggle. Despite barely being able to see, Grace manages to grab a keyboard and smash Francesca unconscious with it. Meanwhile, Titus nearly kills Faith before Ursula stops him. Instead of finishing her off, the twins decide to use Faith as bait to lure Grace into a trap. They openly tell Grace where to find them, fully expecting her to come rescue her sister. Knowing she has no other choice, Grace arms herself by finding a rifle and ammunition, preparing for the final confrontation. Francesca suddenly returns for one last attack, but this time Grace is ready. Without hesitating, she pulls the trigger and blasts Francesca to death. Hearing Faith screaming somewhere deeper inside the building, Grace follows her voice straight toward Ursula and Titus for the final confrontation. But when the twins corner her, Grace is forced to lock herself inside another room for protection. Titus then drags Faith into view and presses a gun against her head, forcing Grace into an impossible situation. Just as Titus is about to pull the trigger, Grace makes a shocking offer. She proposes marriage to Titus. Since marrying Grace would allow him to legally claim the council's power while sparing her life, Titus immediately accepts the deal without hesitation. The sisters are cleaned up and prepared for the twisted wedding ceremony while the remaining cult members gather to witness it. Before the ceremony begins, Ursula privately admits to Grace that she has always known Titus was a monster and spent her entire life trying to control him before he became completely unhinged. Unfortunately, Titus overhears the conversation. Enraged by her betrayal, he violently grabs Ursula and strangles her to death, snapping her neck in front of Grace without a second thought. Soon after, the final wedding begins with the lawyer acting as the officiant. The surviving cult members watch as Grace and Titus officially become husband and wife. The moment the ceremony ends, Titus arrogantly takes the sacred ring and forcefully kisses Grace, believing he has finally secured ultimate power. But in the next second, Grace grabs a nearby dagger and repeatedly stabs Titus in the neck. Earlier, Titus himself revealed the loophole that there are no rules against killing your own family, and Grace uses his own words against him. As Titus collapses, Grace takes the ring back while Faith kicks his dying body into a massive pit filled with corpses below. Now holding control over the council, Grace immediately makes her first and only decision as its leader. She destroys the organization completely. Refusing to spend the rest of her life murdering innocent people for power, Grace throws the sacred ring into the corpse pit. The remaining cult members instantly lose their minds, diving into the pit and brutally attacking each other in desperation to claim the ring before sunrise. But dawn finally arrives, and the deadline passes. One by one, the cultists suddenly begin exploding into horrific showers of blood and flesh until the entire room erupts into total carnage. Madhu survives at first because he stayed away from the pit, believing he outsmarted everyone else, but seconds later, he explodes all over Grace and Faith anyway. As silence finally settles over the massacre, the spirit of Mr. Lubail appears before the sisters one last time. Instead of attacking them, he simply nods in quiet respect, acknowledging that they survived the impossible. As the sisters walk away from the estate together, covered in blood, exhausted, and carrying the goat with them, they finally reconcile after years apart. After surviving pure hell together, Grace and Faith decide to rebuild their relationship and start over as sisters once again. What makes this ending so satisfying is how Grace completely breaks the cycle of greed and violence that controlled these families for generations. Instead of using the council's power for herself, she destroys the entire system, proving she never became like them despite everything she went through. The movie also turns Grace from an ordinary survivor into someone willing to fight back no matter how insane the situation becomes. And in the end, the real victory isn't just surviving the night, it's Grace and Faith finally repairing their broken relationship after years of separation.